Welcome to Emerging Tech Horizons. I'm Mark Lewis, the Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technology Horizons. And our topic today is an exploration of consortia with two experts on the whole issue of consortia and the general topic of acquisition and contracting and all the issues that plague the Department of Defense when it tries to bring on board new emerging technologies. I'm going to be joined today, as I said, by two experts. One is Moshe Schwartz, who's the president of Etherton and Associates. It's an organization that provides expertise in defense acquisition and industrial-based policy. Prior to joining Etherton, Moshe served as the executive director of a congressionally mandated advisory panel on streamlining and codifying acquisition regulations. And he spent 15 years providing analysis and legislative support to Congress on acquisition policy and industrial-based issues, including serving as a specialist at the Congressional Research Service and a senior analyst at the GAO. Moshe has testified before Congress, written extensively on a wide range of acquisition and industrial-based issues, including defense acquisition reform, contracting types, costs and pricing, OTAs, other transaction authorities, and the use of major defense acquisition programs, in addition to socioeconomic policies, the Defense Production Act, GAO bid protests, the DoD audit processing, and wartime contracting. So he was truly an expert on the whole realm of defense acquisition. Served as a senior advisor to the Commission on Wartime Contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan, was an advisor at ISAF headquarters in Afghanistan. In addition to all this, Moshe taught at Carnegie Mellon University's Heinz School of Public Policy, spent 5 years teaching courses on Congress and acquisition policy at National Defense University's Eisenhower School for National Security and Resource Strategy. Holds an MBA from Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School of Business, a Master of Science Public Policy from Carnegie Mellon's Heinz School of Public Policy, and also a JD from Yeshiva University's Cardozo School of Law. So Moshe, welcome. We are also privileged to be joined by Stephanie Halcrow, who is actually a senior fellow for Defense Industrial Base Health and Resiliency right here at National Defense Industrial Association, as well as an external advisor to the Acquisition Innovation Research Center as a member of the Acquisition Innovation Panel. Stephanie is a senior fellow with the Center for Government Contracting within the School of Business at George Mason University. She recently served as a professional staff member on the House Armed Services Committee, where she led efforts to develop, position, implement the HASC ranking members' reform strategies, turning them into tangible legislative solutions. That included garnering bipartisan, bicameral support, as well as soliciting industry and federal government input. And it's that industry connection that we especially value as she applies some of her skills here at NDIA. Stephanie brings to the Center of Government Contracting a keen ability to align priorities, resources across an organization, championing policies to improve manufacturing, sustainment, supply chain security, workforce procurement, financial audit services. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the United States Air Force Academy in computer science and a master's degree in business administration from the Naval Postgraduate School. So Stephanie, Moshe, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Emerging Tech Horizons. So I want to dive right in. First, could I start out by asking you each about your careers and how you arrived at where you are today? And Stephanie, can we start with you, and then Moshe, over to you on a little bit on your career trajectory?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Mark. We really appreciate being here. Gosh, how did I end up here? Well, a lot of good luck and a lot of great influencers and mentors in my life. I spent 20 years in the Air Force, retired, and was really blessed to transition to the Hill. I worked for a senator from Oklahoma for 3 years, and then again was super lucky to be able to transition to the House Armed Services Committee. And then when my boss retired, I transitioned off of the committee and found myself working with basically all the same colleagues that I worked with when I was on the Hill, promoting the same ideas and dealing with the same issues that we dealt with on the Hill. And so I'm really happy to be here today and talk to you about this report that we wrote on the Consortia Model. Not to jump ahead, but I often say that when presented with this opportunity to write this report, I realized that while I was on the Hill, there wasn't a lot written about the Consortium Model, and so I was interested in writing the report that I would have liked to have read when I was on the Hill, and so that was my motivation.
By the way, I just as an aside, from my time on the air staff, we really appreciated having Air Force representation on the Hill. That perspective was so important. So thank you for that. Thank you
Yeah,
for your service to the Air Force, but also thank you for your service on the Hill as well.
absolutely. Go
Um,
Air Force, aim high.
yeah, absolutely. My last job was purple, but yeah, we're not kidding anyone.
Yeah.
So. Moshe, can you tell us a little bit about your career trajectory from law school to defense acquisition? How did that happen?
Oh, I'm not sure that how exactly that happened. I can definitely say it was not a strategically planned goal where I sat down and figured out how that would happen because I started after law school. I became a prosecutor in Brooklyn as an assistant district attorney, and from there joined a public relations firm, and then went to business school. And I was offered a job at American Express after that to do corporate finance on Wall Street. But then I interviewed at OMB and GAO and the FBI, and I felt that tug for government as opposed to industry. And American Express was nice enough to let me out. I think their email actually to me was, well, you accepted our offer, but since you're willing to take a more than 30% pay cut to go to government and not to a competitor, by all means, go right ahead.
Right,
And
it's on you, right? Yeah, yeah,
pretty much.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and spent 3 years at GAO, which was fantastic training and learning how they do things. And that started that career, really. So it was serendipitous events that got me here. And I get the pleasure of doing research and analysis in this fascinating and complex wicked problem.
Yeah, phenomenal, phenomenal. And I guess my own experience, I had so many colleagues in public service and the Pentagon and other parts of government who had exactly the same experience that you, that they felt the pull of government, and such a noble pull as well. And they make some sacrifices, but it's truly appreciated. So I want to dive right in. You guys worked on a report on Consortia. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So, and I know Stephanie, from her staffer perspective, also has similar thoughts in a slightly different perspective, which is really interesting when we were working together and talking about this. But people talk all the time about other transaction authority, and it's been a really hot topic for years. Is it a good authority? Is it a bad authority? Do we have enough data? Is it too expansive? Is it not expansive enough? But what hasn't been talked about a lot is consortia. In recent years, the conversation has started questioning, is there value, isn't there value in consortia? But no analysis that we have been able to find has really dug into that question. What, if anything, is the value proposition of consortia? Do they add, do they detract, do they enhance or limit? So we wrote that report, and we wanted to see what data is available. And part of the motivation was Congress has asked DoD for data, particularly in the last couple of years on consortia, and that data still hasn't been available. And one of the questions was, well, is that data available? How much is there, and what is it telling us? And we started writing that report. That is not the end of the conversation. There is definitely more data, but in short, what we found is there is data, and nobody's trying to hide it, and they are happy, and in many cases want to discuss the data.
So if I could step back for some of our viewers and listeners, what can we ask the more basic question? What do we include in the category of consortia? What does it cover?
Yeah, so the Consortia Model includes 3 entities, usually. So each Consortia Model is designed a little bit differently, but usually there's a government sponsor. There is a consortia, which is the gathering of industry in a certain technology area. And then there usually is a consortia management firm who helps provide all of the administrative and back office activities for the relationship between the government sponsor and the consortia. So as of the publishing of this report, we have identified 42 consortia who do business with the government. 38 of those consortia do business with the DoD, but there was a total of 42. And frankly, that number is growing. I think a lot to the popularity and success of the Consortia Model. Right after we published this report, I found another consortia that had been developed, and but we had to draw the line
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but there is a list in the report of all the consortia, who their government sponsor is, what their focus area, what their dues that they charge. So I think in addition to all of the value added aspects of the report that we discuss and present, there's an appendix that includes that comprehensive list of the consortia. And it's not the end. It will continue to grow.
And I think that Stephanie mentioned one very critical aspect of consortium when we think about this, which is they invariably each revolve around a specific technology or set of technologies. Or in other words, it's a group of experts in that area. They're not generalists where they'll cover everything Air Force or everything Navy. No, it's very specific. So you're dealing with associations and industry and educational entities that are focused on these specific technology areas. And I think that's an important aspect of what consortia bring to the table.
So that's a great lead-in. What is the benefit of the consortium model? What does it bring to the defense industrial base ecosystem? And after you tell us the benefits, I'm going to ask, are there drawbacks?
So I think to everything in the world, there are benefits and drawbacks, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we can do that. But I think there are a number of benefits that they bring. One is, as we just discussed, they are in that milieu of a technology area. So for example, when DoD and specifically the Army with Operation Warp Speed needed to develop the vaccine, they went to a consortia that already had those existing long-standing relationships with the people in industry for development of vaccines and everything that is necessary with it. In fact, and Stephanie, I think, knows the quote better than I do, but I think in that particular case, General Perna had that great quote. What was that, Stephanie?
Yeah, it was fabulous. Operation Warp Speed could not have gone at warp speed without the consortia.
And I think the reason for that is because they already had those relationships in place and already revolved around those technologies.
Got it.
So that's.
And there's actually, if I could just add, there's so that's the Operation Warp Speed is case study C in the report, and there's another case study A that deals with the benefit of having a group of industry and academia in a certain technology area. But what case study A actually focuses on is the benefit of influencing and shaping the conversation with government and informing government of what capabilities are out there and what roadblocks there might be. And so there was an example that we have that Industrial Base Policy Office was trying to they were trying to find a domestic producer of a certain type of military grade propellant, and they put out a solicitation and got 0 responses. And so fast forward a couple years, they said, hey, we can't live with this. So they reached out to an existing consortia and said, hey, can you help? And the consortia said, absolutely. And through the Consortia Model, they were able to bring 55 industry and academia members together to discuss the issue. And really what happened is Industrial Base Policy went back and said, oh gosh, we need to change our acquisition strategy, and we need to kind of shape our requirements a little bit differently because we didn't really know what was out there or what the complications were. And so that's another value, that collaboration, I think, which is really kind of the foundational value that the Consortium Model brings to the government.
Now, on the research, on the basic research side, we've had, university consortia. Do those fall into your category of consortia?
So, there was one specifically, I think, run out of Texas A&M, I believe, on hypersonics.
I was going to ask you about that one because I even had a hand in that one.
Good. Yeah. So that was one that's included in the appendix. And if there are other ones, I either guess I didn't realize it when we were composing the appendix, but there may be more to add.
We were very proud of that consortium. It's actually been doing extremely well. The Joint Hypersonic Transition Office set it up, I think they're up to over 100 universities now in the consortium, including
Wow.
international partners. And then industry jumped in, which is, and we thought we'd maybe have a few industry partners, and there's a really long list now of industry partners that are working with the universities. So uh, I'm gonna log that as a DoD success.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Well, and that brings up another benefit of the consortium model that we identified in the report is access to the industrial base, or as we like to say, the non-traditional defense contractors. And so and again, our report was based on data, and so we were able to get 12 consortia out of the 42 to participate and provide us data. And we found that across those 12 consortia, in FY20, so that was the last a snapshot that we had, there was approximately 5,700 members of the consortia, but 4,500 of those 5,700 were non-traditional defense contractors. So that access to an expansion of the defense industrial base is another value of the consortium model.
yeah, and Moshe, I see you were trying to jump in. Yeah,
Yeah, and I would like to take that a step further, right? So we had one person from DoD, and we've heard this from other people, say that there are companies, and it's actually a case study, there are companies that never would have worked with the Department of Defense but for the consortia getting them involved. Now, why is that important? I think the key reason that that is important here is, according to GAO and DoD data, right? This is their data, not ours. From 2011 to 2020, the number of small businesses in the defense industrial base has dropped by over 40%. And the number of large businesses in the defense industrial base has dropped by an average of, I think it's 7% annually, right? At the same time, the number of businesses in the United States has increased dramatically, and the GDP has increased substantially. So even as defense spending goes up, fewer and fewer companies are choosing to work with DoD, but more and more companies are existing. That is a fundamental problem for our military and their ability to capture the goods and services and capabilities they need. And to the extent that consortia can help with this, why wouldn't you use them?
yeah, no, phenomenal point. I mean, the DoD has been on a push to leverage commercial technology more effectively. Exactly to your point, opening the doors to more participants is obviously a direction that the department needs to be going in. So I asked you if there were downsides. Are there downsides to the consortium model?
Well, I can maybe talk about a criticism that we heard, and in fact, the data actually proved it to be invalid. So we'd heard criticism that, hey, in the consortium model, yeah, you have all these non-traditional defense contractors as members, but they really don't win the awards, or they aren't lead on winning the awards. And actually, the data from the 12 consortia that we worked with proved that not to be true. So 67% of the awards made in FY20 the lead was a non-traditional defense contractor. And so the criticism that all of these consortia are just catering to the primes is not true.
So, and then one downside of using consortia currently on some level is, like for Congress and some people in DoD, there is less data available at the moment. But that's not a problem with the consortia. That's a problem with DoD's active effort to properly gather and analyze data to manage, like anything else, right? That is not consortia unique. And it's probably true, well, it's true writ large. DoD has an issue with data writ large. I think many people would recognize that. But it would also be true with anything that is being used more often that hasn't been done for decades, right? So while you could say, well, there's not enough visibility into consortia currently, I think this is one of the values of the report is, okay, let's fix that, because we can get that. And frankly, without better visibility into the data, it'll be hard to really determine benefits and downsides of different use of consortia. But I think one thing that's really important to point out is consortia, like almost anything else, is not a silver bullet. We are not suggesting that everything is now fixed. OTA works for everything, and the whole world is better and the villagers will dance, right? That is not the case.
Yeah.
It is excellent for certain circumstances. It is marginally better in other circumstances, which arguably means use it if it's better at all, right? And some circumstances, it probably is not appropriate. And it is important for the acquisition workforce in the department to become very comfortable with understanding when to use it and when not to use it and how to best use it.
I've also, honestly, I've heard the criticism that OTAs, and maybe it also applies to Consortia, correct me on this one, but I've heard the criticism that it can sometimes be a Band-Aid approach, that instead of fixing the problem, you just apply a Band-Aid, you do an OTA instead of actually solving acquisition issues writ large. Is that fair or overblown?
So I would suggest that there is not a corner of acquisition that I have seen that in some way or other hasn't been, through either intention or unintentional efforts, misused or improperly applied or anything, right? I mean,
yeah.
If we were going to say because there was an error somewhere, you shouldn't contract that way, we would not use fixed price contracts, we would not use cost type contracts, we would not use IDIQs, right? The trick here is, I go back to, and I think this is one of the critical elements of all acquisition, not that we want to embark into how to fix all of acquisition at large, but is workforce, you know? And I think that is a lot of it. So while perhaps sometimes it's been used in ways that shouldn't have been, and we're talking about OTAs, we're not talking about consortia. They're two different things. We don't want to conflate those. And consortia don't only use OTAs, by the way, right? They use other contract vehicles as well. But to the extent that people have used OTAs improperly, well, they've used everything improperly. We just have to work.
Yeah, okay. Excellent point. Excellent. So along those lines, do we need more information to understand consortium management, to dive into overhead costs? What's your view on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that touches on the recommendations that we make in the report. And the first one that we make is transparency and visibility and of data. The data is there. It needs to be collected. It needs to be publicly available, and not only for Congress to do oversight and the public to see it, but also for DoD to make, strategic decisions on how they want to leverage consortia. The other thing that Moshe talked about is, there's sometimes that the consortia model is really great, but there might be other times that it's not. So one of the other recommendations that we have is that the DoD develop these best practices and incorporate that into training, which, oh, by the way, there doesn't seem to be much training on the consortia model. Right. Training for OTs, which again, like Moshe said, they're separate. We don't want to conflate them, is just beginning. But we also need to establish training on the consortia model. When is it proper that a PEO should, or government sponsor should establish a consortia? Do you have a consortia and a consortia management firm, or do you choose, a little different combination that's out there? So those are recommendations that you find in the report that I think, as we talk to Department of Defense and to Congress, extremely well received.
By the way, just as a comment, one of the things I really admired about the report is you had actionable recommendations, and we've all seen the reports that admire a problem. You didn't just admire the problem; you actually had actionable recommendations. So my hats off to you on that, and there were reasonable recommendations as well. It was something that seemed implementable. So thank you for that one. Are there other recommendations from the report that you'd want to highlight?
Well, I would just jump in there and say that one of the frustrating things that we found in lack of data was identifying successful prototypes and their transition to production contracts. Why? Because the prototyping activity is done in the consortia model, and the consortia and the consortia management firm had information on successful prototypes. But the production follow-on contract or agreement is done directly between the government sponsor and the industry, or a collaboration. So there's a link that is broken there between that information. So one, in tracking more data, we encourage the Department of Defense to reestablish that link so we can see the success of prototypes through the consortia transitioning. But also, we encourage that this be done more because we think there's more opportunity for production level follow-ons from prototypes.
And then another recommendation, which Stephanie touched on, which I think will happen, we both think will happen, is for DAU to implement training on consortia. And I would expect that to occur, but that is another concrete way that the workforce, number one, can get comfortable with OTAs and consortia, because for both of them they're not, and two, is a great mechanism to transmit and propagate those best practices that Stephanie was talking about, right? Because even if you have those best practices, you need a mechanism to make sure those are shared appropriately, and DAU is a great method to do so.
Yes. So, you've hit on a topic that we discuss here a lot, very often at NDIA, which is capturing lessons learned, and especially some of the success stories. What actually worked? I mean, we hear so much about the valley of death. I actually refer to it as the mountain of death if you look at the funding profiles. But we hear so much about that valley of death, and so little about, well, here's what actually worked, and here's an example where we were successful. And even to the point where I'll make the argument, if everything makes it through that valley or that mountain or whatever you want to call it, we're probably doing something wrong. There ought to be a winnowing down. But figuring out what works, really important. So I appreciate your comments along those lines.
Yeah, and I would maybe add to that point is not only what worked, but why it worked, right? Because I think very often something works through force of personality, and you can't create policy off of force of personality.
Yes. Yeah. I have a historian friend, Dick Hallion. He was the Air Force historian. He likes to say all of history is personal. Not to a certain, but you're exactly right. At a certain point, the organization has to exist outside of the driving personality. So I guess I want to say, our audience is primarily interested in emerging technologies, the DoD modernization priorities. Would I be correct in saying that you think the Consortium Model has a lot of application to delivering these emerging technologies? And Moshe, especially, you pointed out that they tend to be centered on technology areas. I don't want it to be a catch-all solution per se, but is it fair to say that Consortia can play a big role in delivering these capabilities?
Oh, I think so, and there are specific, discrete reasons. One is to the extent that they're giving DoD access to more companies, right? That gives DoD access to more technology, right? To the extent, as Stephanie mentioned, that they can help DoD better fashion their requirements for an RFI or an RFP, that could help DoD better articulate to industry and get the response that they need. A third one is, and we would like to see Consortia do this more, they're doing it more than DoD for sure, we would like them to see it do it more, is Consortia does create that ecosystem that allows various companies and educational institutions to get together and pool resources and knowledge to develop a more robust capability to offer to DoD. And to the extent that they allow that to happen, that could be very instrumental for capturing cutting edge technologies that DoD won't get if they just write a proposal and just send it out and wait for individualistic responses.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a big fan of the DoD's MURI program at the university level. That's the Multi-University Research Initiative. Those are, relatively large funding vehicles for universities. And usually they've been targeted at creating whole new areas of research. So the idea is Army, Navy, Air Force create a MURI fund, usually a group of universities to work in that area, bringing in disparate skill sets to kind of kickstart an area. And I'd argue it's been extraordinarily successful. So is it fair to say that, and you can tell me I'm wrong here, but is it fair to say that Consortia can also be used not just to advance a given area, but also in certain respects to create a new technology area, bringing together different fields, different disciplines? Or am I completely wrong on that?
I think you're totally right on that. Well, and what could be interesting is, how DoD will have industry days, and they invite a lot of industry to come down. You can almost flip that model with consortia, where a consortia can say, we're going to have a government day. We're going to invite government agencies to us and say, look what we've got. Look what our companies are working on, where we're not coming to you because you asked us to explore an issue. You come to us and open your mind to things that you haven't thought about in this technology area.
Yeah, and your comments make me think about the Operation Warp Speed case study and our conversations with the consortia and the consortia management firm on that activity. It wasn't the members of the consortia who developed that vaccine, right? It was the friends of the friends of the members of the consortia who developed that vaccine. Now, we're familiar with all those names of the people who developed those vaccines, but it was basically an emerging technology, the new way to develop vaccines that was accessed because the consortia had an industrial base that had friends in other industrial bases.
Well, and I think one question that's worth raising, because it comes up a lot, is, well, why can't DoD just do it? Why can't they do the outreach? Why can't they do the collaboration? And the answer is maybe they can, right? But it's not happening today, and it's for sure not happening at the level that consortia are today able to do it. So, I don't know, we kind of think not to get wrapped around of, well, does it work in theory? We want to get down to, does it work in practice? And in practice, consortia are filling that void that DoD, for whatever reason, isn't doing to the same level, number one. And number two, one thing that we didn't talk about, only reference what consortia do, is they do allow for a tremendous surge capacity if all of a sudden they need, DoD or any government needs a rapid, massive response and simply don't have the personnel to do so.
Kind of, I guess the warp speed example is another is a case in point. Yeah, very good. Our time is coming to an end, but I do want to ask for our listeners, can they get access to your report? And if so, how?
Yes, absolutely. It's the report was published through the Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University, and it is available on their website. And I'm sure we can also provide a link with this podcast to that report as well.
Wonderful. I know you're going to have a lot of folks downloading it based on this conversation. Stephanie, Moshe, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. Thanks for the work that you've done. This is obviously really critical, and we appreciate your time on this.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.